James and Shirley had always been the kind of couple people envied. The kind of love that started young, full of dreams and seemed unbreakable. They met in college. James, the charismatic and ambitious business student, and Shirley, the quiet yet radiant literature major who believed in fairy tales. Their love was effortless, a story unfolding with laughter, whispered promises, and the certainty that they would spend their lives together. James was the dreamer. The one who always spoke about success as if it was already written in his fate. Shirley, the devoted believer in him, never questioned his ambitions. She saw a future so clearly, one where they would build a life together, where James would provide and she would support him through everything. Their wedding was small but beautiful. Shirley's parents had passed years ago, and James's family was distant. But that didn't matter. They had each other. That was all they needed. For the first few years, their life was simple, comfortable. James had secured a job in finance. Not extraordinary, but stable. Shirley had always dreamed of being a writer, but instead she chose to stay home, taking care of their small apartment, making every corner feel like a home. James had promised her that soon she wouldn't have to worry about money at all. "Give me a few years," he would say, kissing her forehead. "You'll have the life you deserve." Shirley believed him. She never questioned where the money came from, never noticed the little shifts, his tension when checking bank statements, the late nights when he'd sit at the kitchen table, running his hands through his hair. She didn't know that their savings were vanishing faster than they could rebuild. Didn't know that James was drowning. It began like it always does. Small debts, unexpected expenses. James had never been reckless, never been the type to waste money. But life had a way of pulling people under. Slowly, methodically, the paychecks never seemed to stretch far enough. Rent, groceries, bills, everything felt heavier. And every month, something new came up. The car needed repairs. Medical bills stacked up. And with each passing week, the feeling of suffocation grew stronger. But James never told Shirley. He couldn't. He was supposed to be the provider, the strong one. He had promised her security, promised her the world. How could he admit that he was failing? So he kept it inside. And then one night he went to the casino. Not to gamble, just to look, just to breathe. But that's how it always starts. James had never been a gambler before. He had always thought of casinos as places for desperate men looking for shortcuts, for fools who believed in luck instead of hard work. But that night, as he watched men walk away from the tables with stacks of cash, something shifted inside him. What if it was that easy? What if luck could change everything? So he placed a bet, just one, a small amount, and he won. The rush was intoxicating. He doubled his money in seconds. And just like that, the fear, the stress, the weight felt lighter. For the first time in months, he felt in control. So he kept going. At first, James was careful. He told himself he wasn't reckless like the others. He only played when he needed to. When bills were tight, he would go to the casino, play a few rounds, win just enough to keep them afloat, and leave. It worked for a while. Shirley never noticed. She saw the groceries stocked, the rent paid on time, and never thought to ask where the money came from. James started convincing himself that this was his way of providing, his way of outsmarting the system. And then, as all gamblers do, he started losing. At first it was small, a few 100 here, 1,000 there. But he told himself it was temporary. "The next game, I'll win it back," he whispered under his breath as he threw another stack of cash onto the table. Then the losses got bigger and suddenly it wasn't just casino money, it was rent money. It was everything. But he couldn't stop because the next game, the next hand, the next spin. That would be the one to fix everything, wouldn't it? That was the lie he kept telling himself. The night it all collapsed started like any other. James had been drinking more than usual. He walked into the casino, his head buzzing, his ego inflated from the alcohol. Tonight, he wasn't going to just win back what he lost. Tonight, he was going to make enough to secure them forever. And then, in his drunken arrogance, he made the worst decision of his life. A man at the table insulted him, called him a loser, a man who played scared. James snapped, ego and alcohol mixed like poison in his veins. And in that moment, nothing mattered but proving that he was not a coward. He went all in, everything he had left. The dealer flipped the cards, and just like that, it was gone. James blinked, his vision blurred, a sick, twisting sensation built in his gut. He had just lost everything. The world around him faded. The lights, the music, the conversations. They all felt distant, surreal. His fingers clenched against the table. His breathing grew shallow. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. And then Zack spoke. Zack had been watching from the shadows. He was the kind of man who made his presence known without needing to say a word, a man who thrived on desperation and James. James was the perfect target. Zack leaned in, a smirk curling on his lips. Need more money. James's head snapped up. He barely processed the words before nodding. Zack chuckled. Are you sure? James's blood roared in his ears. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. Yes. And just like that, the devil handed him more money. Not a small amount. Not a safe amount. A nah. Life-ruining. What brink amount? Zack placed the chips in front of him and sat back, amused. James didn't even breathe before throwing them onto the table. He had to win, had to fix this. The cards were dealt, the game played, and James lost again and again and again. The final hand was dealt. His last chance, his last hope. James held his breath as the dealer flipped the cards. He lost. Silence. Zack sighed, shaking his head. Damn, I've never seen someone lose this much in one night. You're a freak. James couldn't move, couldn't speak. The weight of reality came crashing down on him all at once. You've got 3 months, Zack said, standing up. His tone was casual, but there was an edge to it that made James's stomach churn. Don't forget, if you don't pay, you're dead. James barely heard him. His entire body was numb. His vision swam. He stumbled out of the casino, his heart slamming against his ribs. His hands shook as he reached up, gripping his own hair, his breath coming in rapid gas. What had he done? He had ruined them. He had ruined everything. And now there was no way out. James sat on the cold floor of their bedroom, his back against the dresser, hands clutching his head. His breath was uneven, his chest tight, his mind a whirlwind of panic. The casino lights still flashed in his memory, the weight of Zack's voice pressing down on him like a death sentence. 3 months. He had 3 months. He'd to come up with more money than he had ever seen in his life. And he had nothing. Nothing except a house he could barely afford, a job that paid just enough to keep them afloat, and a wife who had no idea what he had done. Shirley. His heart twisted. She didn't deserve this. She had trusted him. She had given up her dreams, stayed home, built a life around his promises. And now, because of his stupidity, his arrogance, his hard and gritty, she was about to become a widow. His hands trembled as he gripped his hair, pulling, punishing himself for what he had done. He wanted to scream, to break something, but most of all, he wanted to go back in time to undo it. But there was no undoing this. There was only. Well, what came next? Shirley found him like that. At first, she thought he had fallen asleep on the floor. Then she saw his shoulders shaking. James. Her voice was soft, hesitant. James didn't move, didn't answer. She stepped closer, kneeling beside him. James, what's wrong? He lifted his head. And the moment she saw his face, her stomach dropped. His eyes were red, swollen, his expression one of complete and utter devastation. Sent a shiver down her spine. Talk to me, she whispered. James let out a strangled breath, shaking his head. And then it all came out. The gambling, the losses, that a debt. Every word felt like a hammer to her chest. By the time he was done, she could barely breathe. She blinked, stunned, her mind struggling to piece everything together. Then, in a whisper, how much? James hesitated. Shirley grabbed his wrist. How much, James? And then he told her. The number shattered something inside her. She stumbled back, shaking her head. That's not possible. I know, James rasped. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the bed, her pulse roaring in her ears. This wasn't real. This wasn't their life. This was something that happened to other people. Not them, not none them. Shirley inhaled sharply, trying to think, trying to breathe. How? She swallowed, forcing the words out. How are we supposed to pay this back? James didn't answer because there was no answer. Only silence. Only the weight of what was coming. I'm going to die, Shirley. His voice broke, and so did she. They spent the next few weeks trying everything. James's first move was his job. He begged for an advance, denied, tried to take out a loan. Denied. He reached out to old friends, distant family members, anyone who might have been able to help. Nothing. Shirley, for the first time in their marriage, took charge. She sold whatever they had of value, furniture, jewelry, clothes, even her wedding ring. James tried to stop her, but she would not let him die, not because of this. By the end of the month, they had managed to scrape together 1/2 of the outgrow of the debt, only half. And half wasn't enough. Not for Zach. The gang arrived on a cold evening. James had expected them. What he hadn't expected was for them to show up at his home. Shirley was in the kitchen when she heard the knock. James stiffened, his breath hitching. He knew that knock. Slow, confident. She was drying a plate when she turned to him. Who is that? James didn't answer. He was already moving, already reaching for the door. When he opened it, Zach stood there, his expression unreadable. Behind him, 3 other men loomed, silent, waiting. James swallowed hard. I told you I was working on it. Zach smirked. Yeah, so am I. His eyes flickered past James's shoulder. To Shirley. She hadn't meant to be in view, hadn't meant to freeze. When Zach's gaze landed on her, Zach's lips curled slightly. Nice place, James tensed. Zach took a step forward, lowering his voice. I'll make this easy for you. You got 10 days. James clenched his fists. That's not enough time. Zach's smirk widened. Then you better make it enough. He turned, ready to leave, then paused, stepped closer to Shirley, and handed her a card. Shirley's fingers twitched as she took it. Her entire body are frozen. Zach's voice dropped to something almost gentle. If you want to save your husband's life, you call me. James was too far away to hear, too distracted by Zach's men, their lingering presence, their threat. Shirley stood there, gripping the card like it was a live wire. Her pulse pounded against her skull. Zach held her gaze for a moment longer, and then he was gone. That night, Shirley didn't sleep. James paced, muttering to himself, whispering desperate ideas, trying to grasp at solutions that didn't exist. Shirley sat in silence, staring at the card. She hadn't told James what Zach had said, hadn't told him what the offer was, because she already knew what his reaction would be. But she also knew that there was no other way. James could not get the money. Not in 10 days. She had tried everything, and if they failed, James would die and she would be alone. So on the 8th day, she made the call. Her voice barely came out. I'll do it. Zach's laugh was slow, knowing. Good girl. She hated herself, hated the way her hands trembled, hated the way she could already feel the weight or wound of what was coming. But most of all, she hated that she had no choice. Shirley arrived at the location as Zach had given her a warehouse. She stepped inside, her breath shallow, her heart slamming against her ribs. The men were coming, waiting, 42 of them. She had told herself she would be strong, told herself she would just get through it. But as the first man stepped toward her, as Zach leaned against the wall, smirking, something inside her broke. And then there was no turning back. Shirley had never felt cold like this before. Not the kind of cold that came from weather, not the kind that could be chased away by a warm blanket or a hot drink. This was a different kind of cold, the kind that seeped into your bones, twisted in your gut, and made you feel like you were standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into a void that had no bottom. She stood outside the warehouse. Her fingers curled into tight fists at her sides, her breath uneven. She had been standing there for what felt like forever. Zach had given her a time, a place, and she had come. She had come because she had to. Because if she turned around now, if she walked away, she would be signing James's death certificate. But walking inside meant signing hers, at least the version of herself she once knew. Shirley inhaled sharply, pressing her hands against her stomach as if trying to hold herself together. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she stepped forward. The metal door loomed in front of her. She raised a trembling hand and knocked. The door opened almost instantly. She had expected Zach, but it wasn't Zach. It was someone else. A man she had never seen before. Big, scarred, cold eyes. He looked her up and down, a slow smirk spreading across his face. Then he stepped aside, wordlessly motioning for her to enter. Shirley swallowed hard and stepped inside. The door shut behind her, loud, final. And suddenly she knew there was no way out. Not until this was over. She wasn't alone. They were waiting for her. Men. So many men, some standing, some sitting. Some already leering at her as if she were nothing more than an object. A thing they had been promised. Her stomach twisted. The air was thick with her mane. Cigarette smoke, alcohol, sweat, a sickening mixture that made her dizzy. And then finally, Zach stepped forward. He looked relaxed, amused, like this was just another night. "Didn't think you'd actually come," he said, tilting his head. "Guess you love your husband more than I thought." Shirley clenched her jaw. She wouldn't cry. Not in front of them. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "I'm here," she forced out. Zach smiled. "That you are." Then he turned to the room. "Let's get started." Shirley felt no sick. She could barely hear anything over the sound of her own heartbeat. She was trembling. She didn't even realize it until she felt the first hand on her. Rough, unfamiliar, unwanted. Her breath hitched, her body locked up. She couldn't do this. She couldn't. But then Zach's voice cut through the haze. "Relax," he murmured. Shirley's eyes snapped to him. He leaned in close, his voice low. "You made a deal, remember?" She couldn't breathe. She felt her knees buckle slightly. Zach smirked. "Don't pass out now, sweetheart. We're just getting started." Shirley lost count of the hands of the faces of the time. At first, she thought she would feel pain, but the truth was worse. She felt nothing because to feel anything would mean acknowledging what was happening. So she shut down, turned herself off. The men came and went, each one leaving a piece of her more ruined than the last. Some were rough. Some whispered things in her ear that she tried desperately to block out. Some laughed. Some didn't speak at all, but all of them took. And when it was finally over, when the last man had left, she was nothing but a hollow shell. Her body was numb. Her mind was shattered. And Zach looked at her like she was in entertainment. "You did good," he said. 42 men. Damn. Shirley didn't move. Couldn't. He crouched in front of her, tilting his head. "Guess that means the debt's paid." He sounded almost on board, as if this had been a simple transaction. Shirley stared at the floor, her eyes empty. She wanted to scream. She wanted to die. Instead, she forced herself to stand. It took everything she had left. She reached for her clothes with shaking hands, ignoring the way Zach's men watched her. Then without a word, she walked out. The house felt too bright, too normal. James was waiting. She had told him she would be out visiting an old friend. That had been her excuse. She had spent the entire day being destroyed. And now she was back in their home with her husband. James smiled when he saw her. For a moment, she almost broke. Almost collapsed in front of him, confessed everything, begged him to just hold her and make her feel human again. But she couldn't, because this wasn't over yet. She had saved him. That was all that mattered. So she forced a small smile. James's gaze softened. "You look tired," he murmured. "Everything okay?" Shirley swallowed the bile in her throat. Yeah, she lied. And then the phone rang. James reached for the phone without thinking. Hello. Shirley turned, her body locking up. Then she heard Mona's voice. Zach calm, amused, mocking. Your wife paid off your debt, buddy, Zach said smoothly. 42 times. Silence. James froze. His fingers clenched around the phone. Shirley's heartbeat stopped. James didn't move, didn't breathe. Then slowly he turned. His eyes met hers. And in that moment, she knew he was never going to forgive her. The room went silent, not just any silence, a dead silence, the kind that comes before a storm. James stood completely still, his hand gripping the phone so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His eyes were locked onto Shirley, and she saw it the moment his heart broke. His breathing slowed. His expression didn't change, but Shirley felt it. A shift in the air, a tension so thick that she could barely breathe. She opened her mouth to explain, to beg, to say anything. But James's voice cut through the silence first. You did what? It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was quiet. Which was worse? Shirley's lips trembled. She had rehearsed this moment in her head. She had told herself that James would understand, that he would see her sacrifice, that he would hold her and tell her it was okay, that it hadn't been for nothing. But looking into his eyes now, she knew she had lost him forever. Tears welled up. James, he dropped the phone. It clattered against the floor. The impact like a gunshot in the silent house. James stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Shirley stepped back. He had never looked at her like this before. Not with love, not with anger, but with something much worse. Disgust. James's voice was empty. You didn't trust me. Shirley froze. I got the money this morning. Her heart stopped. She swayed slightly. What? James let out a hollow, bitter laugh. I got the money, he repeated through a colleague this morning. Shirley shook her head violently. No, she whispered. This one wasn't real. It couldn't be real. James had been hopeless, helpless. That's why she had done this. That's why she had sold her soul. Because there was no other way, right? Right, you didn't even ask me, James continued, his voice breaking. He swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. You just threw yourself at them. His hands clenched into fists. I did it to save you, Shirley sobbed. James's head tilted slightly, as if considering her words. Then he laughed. Not a real laugh. A broken, shattered, dead laugh. Then, just as quickly, it stopped. His eyes darkened. You did it for me? Shirley nodded rapidly. Yes, James inhaled, then whispered. You're dead to me. Shirley's blood ran cold. She stepped forward. James, please. Click. Her breath caught. The gun. He had bought it that morning for protection. Now he pointed it at her. Tears spilled down her face. James. Put it down, she whispered. Please. He blinked, his expression empty. I can't, he murmured, and before she could say another word, the shot rang out. Shirley gasped. Her legs gave out. She hit the floor. Hard. Her vision blurred. The pain. Oh God, the pain. Her chest felt like it was caving in, her hands clutched at the wound, warm blood gushing. Through her fingers. She looked up at James. His face was wet with tears. She choked. James stepped forward, kneeled beside her, stroked her hair. I'm sorry, he whispered. Shirley's lips trembled. She wanted to say something, to tell him she loved him, that she hadn't meant to destroy them, that all she had ever wanted was to keep him safe. But her voice, it wouldn't come. Darkness started creeping in at the edges of her vision. James's face blurred, her chest rose, fell. Then, one last time, it stilled. Shirley was gone. James sat there for a long time, his wife's lifeless, oilless body in front of him, his own hands uncovered in her blood, his mind blank. Then something inside him snapped, a point, switch flipped. There was no grief, no remorse, only one thing. Rage. James's fingers tightened around the gun. He had nothing left, nothing to live for, which meant he had nothing to lose. Hidaro stood, walked over to the dresser, grabbed his keys. Then without hesitation, he walked out the door, straight toward Aram. James drove in silence. No music, no thoughts. Just the dull hum of the engine and the weight of the gun in his lap. Zach's hideout was 15 minutes away. James barely blinked as the miles disappeared beneath him. He didn't know what he was going to say. Didn't care. He only knew one thing. They were going to die. Every last one. The warehouse was alive with laughter, drunken voices, celebration. James stepped inside. No hesitation. No words. The first bullet hit Zach in the chest. He stumbled back. His drink dropped to the floor. Silence. Every head turned toward James. His face was stone. You enjoyed my wife. His voice was dead. His next bullet took out the man closest to him. Then another, then another. Screams filled the room. Men scrambled for cover, for guns. James didn't care. One by one, he put them down. 16 bodies hit the ground. Blood had painted the floors. The air smelled of gunpowder in death. The survivors fled. James let them go. His gun clicked, empty. He exhaled and sat down. The police would come. It didn't matter. It was over. The flashing lights arrived minutes later. Officers stormed in, weapons drawn. James didn't resist, didn't flinch, didn't say a word. He was a done. As they cuffed him, one officer looked at the carnage, then at James. What the hell happened here? James finally spoke. His voice was calm. I paid off a debt. The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with anticipation. The kind that came before a storm. The kind that settled in people's lungs when they knew they were about to witness something unforgettable. James sat at the Defend Jamest's table, his hands cuffed in front of him. He barely moved, barely breathed. The world outside was in chaos over what he had done. 17 dead. One of the bloodiest killings in recent history. The media called him a monster. A mass murderer. Some whispered about his motive. Others speculated that it was just madness. But James knew the truth, and soon the world would too. It took weeks just for the case to make it to trial. During that time, James sat in his cell, staring at the ceiling, reliving every single moment. Shirley's broken voice, her tears, her last breath, Zach's smirk. The gunshots, the blood, none of it felt real. But the silence in his cell, that was real. The emptiness inside him, that was real. And now, as he sat in the courtroom, staring at the judge yard, the jury, the faces of strangers who would decide his fate, all he felt was nothing. The prosecution painted him as a cold-blooded killer. They called him James Juris, unstable. A vigilante who thought he had the right to play God. But when James's attorney stood, his voice steady, his expression unreadable, the story finally changed. The courtroom was silent as James took the stand. This was the moment. The moment that would had to find him. The moment the world would finally hear the truth. James exhaled. Then, in a calm, unwavering voice, he spoke. He told them everything, how it started with him, a small bet, how the wins turned to losses, how he owed money to men who didn't forgive debts. He spoke about Zach, about the key threats, about even the moment he realized his life was over. And then he spoke about Shirley, the sacrifice, the phone call that shattered him, the moment he realized he had already lost everything. When he described pulling the trigger on his own wife, some people in the courtroom gasped. When he described the rage occur that drove him to Zach's hideout, others looked away. And when he finished, when he said in a voice or two steady for a man who had killed 17 people, I have no regrets. There was only silence. It took the jury less than 4 hours to reach a decision. James sat motionless as the judge, cleared his throat, and spoke. On the charges of first-degree murder, James closed his eyes. Creti guilty. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Some expected my death. Others thought he would get life without parole. Instead, the judge looked directly at James, his expression unreadable. Life in prison. No possibility of parole. James exhaled. Not in relief. Not in fear. Just because. Because this was always how it was going to end. Prison was silent. Not the kind of silence that came with peace. The kind of silence that felt heavy. James didn't speak much, didn't interact, didn't care. He was a ghost walking through the halls. The other inmates gave him space, not because they were afraid of him, but because they saw the short truth. James wasn't a man afraid to die. James was a man already dead. He thought about her every day. At night when the lights went out, he could still see her, still hear her. James, please, heard the final moments were haunted him, the way she had cried, the way she had looked at him before he pulled the trigger. He told himself that he hadn't done the right thing, that he had put her out of her misery. But that was a wrong lie. The truth she had was saved him, and he had was destroyed her. And that was something he would never escape. The world never forgot about James. For a while, he had been made everywhere. News headlines, debates on morality, arguments about whether he was a victim or a monster. But time passed, and people moved on. New stories replaced his, and James became just another inmate, just another name. One night, James sat on the floor of his cell. A piece of paper lay in front of him, a letter to her. Shirley. He had started it 100 times, but the words never came out right, so he just wrote 3 sentences. I'm sorry, I love you. I wish it had been me. Then, without another thought, he set it on fire, watched it burn, and as the ashes drifted to the floor, he whispered her name. Once, then never again. Years passed. James never changed, never and spoke much, never fought. He just where he existed. Until one night he didn't. The guards found him motionless in his cell. The cause of death? Heart failure. No one questioned it. No one mourned. And when they carried him out, there was no funeral, no service, just a body being moved. Another inmate replaced him in his cell within a week, and that was it. James was gone. Just like Shirley, just like Zach, just like all of them. Some stories lost in with justice, some end with eerie redemption. This one, it just ended. No lessons, no victories. Just Bonarum man who lost everything. A woman who had died for Tanana, nothing, and a world that Shvat moved on without them. Because in the end, nothing really changed. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and like this video for more true crime video. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and theories in the comments section below. Take care and see you in the next video.